Hello, hello, and welcome back to Purposeful Woman podcast. Today we have amazing Melissa Guller.
Yep,
Is the
Guller like
found
color.
is a color
Yeah,
Guller
Guller like
is the
color.
okay Guller like color, and she's the founder of Wit and Wire, where she helps online business owners share their expertise, reach new audiences, and expand their earning potential through podcasting. All right, hi and welcome, Melissa.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming on. I feel like you're such an experienced podcaster, and I just want to like right dive into question about podcasts, but I would love to hear your story first. Share with us
Sure.
how did you start it and what inspired you to do so.
Before I got into podcasting, I was actually teaching. So I live in New York City and I was teaching, of all things, Excel classes in New York. And I'm such a nerd. I love all of that productivity and organization. And I joke that my brain is in like rows and columns. But just the feeling of being in a classroom and helping people really like lights me up. It's what motivates me. And after doing that for a few years, I got a little bit curious about podcasting because I think it's such a great medium to reach new audiences and to help people. And you can get into podcasting for all kinds of reasons, but I wanted to try it out. So I got into my first podcast and I learned a lot from my very first podcast, which is no longer in production. We can talk a little bit about more what I wish I had done or known the first time. But I then pivoted and started a different podcast called Book Smart, where I talked about self development books with one of my best friends, Em. And that show really took off organically. We started getting a ton of listeners, people coming back to tune into our books. And by then, I had really developed my chops as a podcast producer and host. And so I pitched my employer Teachable and I said, we would really benefit from reaching a bigger audience by having a podcast to connect with creators about what it means to earn money online through online courses. So I pitched the CEO, he gave me the green light. And just a couple months later, we launched Everything is Teachable, which launched as the #2 career podcast in America, which was a huge, like, humbling honor. And then after helping Teachable, I wound up launching my own business because I just saw a huge need to help specifically more women get into podcasting because I think often we are waiting for permission to share our voice or to share our message. And in particular, the tech of podcasting, I know can feel really stressful and really foreign, but I really believe anybody can launch a podcast on any topic, no matter how experienced you feel or don't feel. It's just a matter about getting comfortable with the tech. And that's why today I help people launch their podcasts, build their audiences. And I really don't believe you have to have a huge podcast to make an impact. I think you just have to have something to say and a unique perspective.
Oh, I love that. And you know, it's really resonates. A lot of people need just this permission. This, okay, yes, you can do it. Like you can do it, go for it. And I love that you are teaching that. All right, well, I would really love to know, and you just already kind of touched up on it, like we will talk about this later. What would you do if you have like all the knowledge that you have right now, and that will be like 3 years ago? What would you tell yourself?
So when I launched my very first podcast, I knew I wanted to get into the space. And I was just kind of thinking about what topics were interesting to me. And so I landed on this ironically titled podcast called Figuring It Out. And it was almost a millennial life playbook about jobs, dating, how to write a profile that isn't awful, how to get hired in a modern era, how to negotiate. It was pretty wide spanning. And I got really great feedback about the episodes. But the thing that I realized later and that I wish I had known is that I didn't have a clear listener in mind. And I didn't have a clear sense of why I was doing the podcast and how it would help me grow in my own goals. So I didn't really have an interest in becoming like a millennial expert. And millennial is pretty broad. Like if you try to imagine, okay, where would I go to market this podcast? I couldn't quite figure it out. Like millennials want different kinds of jobs. They have different desires when it comes to dating. Some of them are married. They're not even interested in dating. Some of them are in America. Some of them are in other countries. Like there were just so many things. And I realized millennial was not specific enough. So then I decided that instead of continuing down that route, I wanted to pursue something that was really of interest to me. And so I decided, I'm not going to start my next podcast for money or for anything like that. I just want to chat about books that I love with my friend who loves them too. And we'll see how this goes. And co hosting a podcast has a great dynamic because you're really in it with a partner and it's so enjoyable. And we just realized, even if nobody listened to us, we would still love what we were doing. But then later down the line, when I started Wit and Wire's podcast, I knew without a doubt I was targeting women in business, people who wanted to get more visible, wanted to build up their authority, people who wanted to share their platform or their message. And because of that, now my podcast has grown exponentially, because when you have that clarity around who you're talking to and how you're trying to position yourself as the host of the podcast, it all gets a lot easier to make decisions. But when you're first getting started, I think we're all so hung up on the right microphone that we forget to ask, why are we doing this and who is it for?
I love that. It's like a business. We
Yes.
gotta be very clear on the niche, and the same, anything you do, you gotta know your why. Why are we doing this? Okay, so what would be your number one advice for anyone who is starting out and asking themselves, okay, how do I start right now? Where do
I
I
think the
start?
biggest thing you could do is, since we've already talked about knowing who your ideal listener is and just kind of knowing who you're talking to, I'll get into more about what topics have real growth potential. In 2021, there's, I think, a big misconception that if you haven't already started a podcast, it's too late, because it feels like there are so many out there, but that's just not true at all. In fact, there are, I don't remember the stat, but 10 times as many blogs as podcasts. It's probably even a bit higher. So truthfully, there's so much opportunity still to get into podcasting. It's brand new. But what you can't do is try to be the podcast for everyone. So if you want to start a podcast and just talk about whatever, and you think that by targeting a huge audience of anybody with any topic, it's going to be really challenging to grow. Because if you imagine how a friend might recommend a podcast to you, they're going to say, oh, I loved Viktoriia's podcast about productivity tips and motivating women in business and becoming a purposeful woman. You should listen to her show because you fit into that. Or you would say, oh, I loved Melissa's podcast because you're starting a podcast. You should really tune in. So the way to grow is to get really clear on what your podcast is about. And niching down, I know, is very scary. It feels like you're eliminating a lot of people, but really it's the only way to become the go-to podcast for your thing. So you can niche down on your audience. Maybe you're kind of all topics for single parents. That's really niche. That's going to be really successful. Or maybe you decide that you're going to be kind of for everybody, but about the paleo diet. That's so specific. Maybe you can have a broader audience. So you can think about getting specific in two ways, either who you're talking to or what you're talking about.
I love that. Oh my God. You know, when I was starting online business, I did started on millennials on purpose, which is very broad. And then I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I see you. I'm attracting such a different people, MLM, networking, coaches, and just like product businesses. And I decided I can't serve anyone. So you got to really, really, really niche down. I love it. This is the golden nuggets of business. Thank you. So my last question that I ask everyone on this podcast is, I want you to fill in a blank. And the question sounds like this. If you really knew me, you will know that I am blank.
Ooh, I wish I had researched what more people had said to prepare for this. I would say I wish people knew that I was just like them. I think that it's funny, the bigger my business grows, the more people think that I'm like this badass woman running this business. And don't get me wrong, I do feel like a badass. I absolutely love running my own business and having the freedoms that it comes with. But at the end of the day, I'm just a regular person who watches Bridgerton after work and who likes making chili and who curls up with a good book on a weekend. Like, I'm a normal person. And if I've had all the success that I've had with podcasting and online business, that's why I'm so confident that anybody else can do it. It does not happen overnight. And even if you feel like you see somebody whose success seems like an overnight success, I know they've been working for years. So I would just say, know that everybody's going through their own struggles, but we're all just regular people. And that means that you can do it too. You don't have to be,
Yeah.
touched and have this super
Thank you.
special power. Like, you just have to really want it and care enough about your topic, and you'll find success.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. Will you share with us how we can reach out to you, and how our audience can find you?
I would love to connect with anybody interested in launching a podcast or building on your existing show. You can find my podcast called Wit and Wire in whatever app you're currently using to tune into podcasting. And I'm also on Instagram at Wit and Wire.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And as always, thank you so much for coming, and send us a text with your thoughts and feedbacks to +1 401 399 4105. And anywhere, if you're watching on YouTube or podcast, please give us a like and some love. That will help us to grow. Thank you, Melissa, for coming. And
Thanks again.
I'll see you in the next episode. Bye. And if you love this episode and you would love to see more of that, click the subscribe button to Purposeful Woman Podcast. And don't forget to text us to stay in tune with the Purposeful community for awesome tricks by texting to number +1 401 399 4105, and we will link descriptions in the episode to all of that we mentioned today. Bye, turn your one day to day one with a purposeful day.